Welcome to Redacted Reality. If the allure of the shadowy, cryptic, and mystical tales captivate you, then please subscribe and hang around. Chapter 14. Into the Mall. Detective Miller's voice crackled through the radio with professional calm as Team 1 approached the Whittaker house's main entrance. The Victorian structure loomed before them. Its weathered clapboard siding and sagging wraparound porch created an impression of genteel decay that belied the malevolence Sarah and the others had described. Team 1, front entrance, Miller reported, his voice steady despite the unnatural silence that had settled over the property. No bird calls, no insect hum, no wind through the trees, just the soft crunch of dead leaves beneath their boots. Officer Martinez flanked Miller's left, his hand resting instinctively on his service weapon, despite regulations against drawing it unless threatened. To Miller's right, Officer Rodriguez swept the porch with methodical precision, her body camera capturing every detail of their approach. Doors ajar, Rodriguez observed, noting the gap of perhaps 6 inches between the heavy wooden door and its frame. No obvious signs of forced entry. Miller tested the boards beneath his feet, finding them surprisingly solid despite the house's apparent age. Structure seemed sound, he reported into his radio, though something about his observation felt wrong. Houses this old, abandoned for decades, shouldn't maintain such structural integrity. The front door opened with a whisper, rather than the protesting groan they'd expected. Miller stepped inside first, flashlight beam cutting through the dim interior despite the morning light filtering through grimy windows. Holy. Martinez's voice trailed off as they entered the foyer. The interior defied every expectation of an abandoned building. Dust-coated surfaces and cobwebs draped from the corners, but the fundamental structure remained intact. Wallpaper peeled in places but still clung to the walls. The grand staircase showed water stains but no structural damage. Even the hardwood floors, though dulled with age, showed no signs of rot or warping. This doesn't make any sense, Rodriguez murmured, panning her camera across the preserved interior. 40 years of abandonment should have destroyed this place. Miller nodded grimly, remembering Sarah's warnings about the house's unnatural preservation. Stay alert. Document everything. They moved through the ground floor systematically. Sitting room, dining room, kitchen. Each space told the same story. Age and neglect, yes, but not the complete deterioration they should have found. Furniture remained intact beneath dust-covered sheets. Windows, while grimy, weren't broken. Even the plumbing fixtures, though stained, showed no signs of freezing damage. Command, this is Team 1, Miller reported as they completed their sweep. Ground floor clear. No signs of the missing persons, but the interior preservation is unusual. Copy, Team 1, came the response from the command post. Any indication of recent habitation? Miller's flashlight beam caught fresh disturbances in the dust patterns, footprints leading towards the servants' quarters. Affirmative. Multiple sets of tracks, consistent with 3 individuals. Trail leads down towards the back of the house. As they followed the footprints, Rodriguez's radio crackled with interference. Command, Team 2, came Parks' voice through heavy static. We've got equipment issues. Kitchen area showing. The transmission dissolved into white noise. Team 2, repeat your last, Miller commanded, but only static answered. In the kitchen, Lieutenant Parks and his team discovered the source of the drag marks that the witness had described. A heavy iron pot sat beneath the window, its interior stained with what appeared to be dried blood. Nearby, rope hung from exposed ceiling beams, though whatever had been suspended there was now gone. Someone cleaned up, Officer Stevens observed, noting the absence of the mutilated deer carcass Marcus had described. Recent, too. The floors had been scrubbed. Parks knelt beside the iron pot, careful not to contaminate potential evidence. Blood's been diluted, but it's here. And look at this. He pointed to symbols carved into the wooden countertop, runes that matched the descriptions from the witness's research. Radio's going crazy, Officer Kim reported, tapping her communication device as it emitted bursts of static. Can't raise command. Parks frowned, checking his own radio. The interference was getting worse, not better. Equipment malfunction. Continue the sweep and report back when we're in range." They moved towards the servants' quarters, following the same path that Marcus had taken. The narrow hallway stretched before them, doors standing open to reveal small bedrooms in various states of decay. But as they progressed deeper into the passage, the preservation pattern changed. These rooms showed the expected signs of abandonment. "Temperature's dropping," Stevens noted, his breath beginning to mist in the suddenly cold air. Parks nodded, feeling the chill seep through his uniform. The further they moved from the main house, the more natural the decay became. Wallpaper peeled completely away here. Floorboards showed water damage, and the smell of mold grew stronger. At the end of the hallway stood the heavy metal door Marcus had described, iron-banded wood that looked more like a barrier than simple interior architecture. "That's not standard construction," Kim observed, running her gloved hand along the reinforced hinges. "This was built to contain something." Parks tested the door handle, finding it locked, or keep people out. He gestured to his team. "On 3. Team 2, assigned to the eastern approach, had encountered their own anomalies. The kitchen's entrance Miller's team had used proved difficult to locate from the outside, not because it was hidden, but because the building's exterior seemed to shift subtly when viewed from different angles. "Did we pass this window already?" Officer Shen asked, studying a particular pane of glass that seemed familiar. Sergeant Walsh continued the property map, frowning. "According to this, we should have reached the kitchen door 50 feet ago." They continued around the building's perimeter, their confusion mounting. The structure appeared larger from the outside than the interior dimensions suggested, as if the walls contained space that didn't correspond to the rooms within. "There." Shen pointed to a side entrance partially obscured by overgrown bushes. "Has to be it." As they approached, Walsh felt a growing sense of unease. The door stood slightly ajar, just as the front entrance had been. But something felt wrong, like an invitation that shouldn't be accepted. "Equipment check," Walsh ordered, his instincts overriding procedure. Shen tested his radio, receiving only static. His body camera's display flickered intermittently. Even his standard-issue flashlight seemed dimmer than it should be. "All malfunctioning," he reported, "but we haven't been near any electrical interference." Walsh nodded grimly. The witnesses had mentioned equipment failures, but experiencing it firsthand was unsettling. "We proceed, but stay close. No separation under any circumstances." The basement team, led by Corporal Davis, faced the most direct challenge. The cellar entrance the witnesses had described gaped before them like a mouth, stone steps descending into absolute darkness that their flashlights seemed unable to penetrate effectively. "Visibility's poor," reported Officer Martinez as they began their descent. "Lights aren't reaching as far as they should." Davis nodded, noting the same phenomena. Their tactical flashlights, designed to illuminate targets at 100 yards, barely reached the bottom of the stone steps. "Stay together. Test each step before putting your full weight on it." The basement stretched further than the house's footprint should have allowed. Stone walls disappeared into shadows that moved and shifted despite the absence of any light source that could cast them. The air was thick with moisture and something else, a metallic taste that reminded Davis of blood. "Sarge," whispered Officer Thompson, his voice barely audible. "I keep hearing something, like voices, but too quiet to make out." Davis paused, listening intently. At the edge of hearing, barely perceptible, came a sound that might have been whispering, multiple voices speaking in unison. The words unintelligible, but the rhythmic hypnotic. "Probably pipe settling," Davis said, though he didn't believe it. "Keep moving." They discovered several chambers branching off from the main basement, spaces that definitely didn't appear on any architectural plans. Some contained what appeared to be altars, stone slabs stained dark with substances that could have been blood. Others held symbols carved into the walls, similar to those the witnesses had described, but more elaborate, more extensive. "This is extensive," Thompson observed, photographing the carvings. "Someone spent a lot of time down here." "Someone or something," Martinez muttered, and caught herself. "Sorry, Sarge. This place just gets to you. Davis understood the feeling. The basement felt alive somehow, aware of their presence and evaluating their worth. Every shadow seemed to conceal movement. Every sound echoed with unnatural resonance. As they moved deeper into the subterranean maze, their radio communications with the surface failed entirely. The basement seemed to exist in its own pocket of space and time, cut off from the world above. We need to map this systematically, Davis decided, marking their path with chalk. Document everything and get back to the surface to report. But as they continued their exploration, the basement seemed to expand around them, new passages appearing where none had existed before. The chalk marks they'd left began to fade, as if the walls themselves were absorbing them. Back at the command post, the radio silence was becoming alarming. Officer Shen, assigned to monitor communications, found himself dealing with increasing static and lost signals from all three teams. Detective Miller's team went dark 5 minutes ago, he reported to the remaining supervisors. Lieutenant Parks hasn't checked in for 7 minutes, and Corporal Davis hasn't responded to repeated calls. Sarah, listening from her position by the command vehicle, felt her anxiety spike. This is exactly what happened to our friends, she said to Marcus and Lily. The house isolates people, cuts them off. Marcus nodded grimly. Equipment failures, communication breakdowns, spatial disorientation. It's following the same pattern. Lily hugged herself against a chill that had nothing to do with the morning air. We have to warn them somehow. Officer Shen overheard their conversation, his professional skepticism warring with the evidence before him. Houses don't cause equipment failures, he said, but his voice lacked conviction. This one does, Sarah replied firmly, and it's just getting started. Inside the house, Detective Miller's team had reached the servants' quarters, following the same path Marcus had taken. The heavy iron-banded door stood before them, exactly as described, a barrier that spoke of secrets and containment. This lock's been forced recently, Miller observed, examining scratches on the metal hardware. Someone's broken through here. Rodriguez aimed her camera at the door, while Martinez tested the handle. It turned easily, too easily for a lock that should have resisted entry for decades. The door swung open to reveal a staircase descending into darkness. But this wasn't the basement access they'd expected. These stairs were carved from stone, much older than the house above, and they descended at a steeper angle than any modern building code would allow. This isn't on the architectural plans, Rodriguez whispered, her voice echoing strangely in the narrow passage. Miller felt a wave of claustrophobia wash over him, unusual for someone who'd spent 20 years investigating enclosed crime scenes. Document the entrance, then we go down. Stay close. As they began their descent, the temperature dropped noticeably. Their breath misted in the sudden frigid air, and their flashlight beams seemed to bend and distort, as if the darkness had substance. Sir? Martinez said, his voice tight with an emotion he couldn't name. I'm starting to feel like we shouldn't be here. Miller understood the sensation, a primitive warning system that kept humans alive for millennia. But they had missing persons to locate and a job to complete. Fear is normal in unknown environments, he replied. Though his own unease was growing, we pushed through it. Behind them, the door they'd entered through swung shut like the sound of a coffin lid closing. Martinez spun around, testing the handle, finding it locked once again. We're sealed in, he reported, fighting to keep panic from his voice. Miller's training kicked in, overriding his instinctive fear. There's always another way out. We find our missing persons, we find an exit, and we complete the mission. But as they continued deeper into the stone passage, Miller couldn't shake the feeling that they were descending into something far older and more dangerous than a simple missing persons case. The walls around them pulsed with malevolent awareness, and whispers in unknown languages seemed to follow in their footsteps. Above them, the Whittaker house waited patiently, as it had for generations, to feed once again. The stone passage opened into a vast chamber that defied the house's architectural footprint. Officer Rodriguez's body camera captured smooth walls that curved away into darkness, their surface covered with symbols that seemed to writhe and shift when viewed peripherally. This is impossible, Martinez breathed, his voice barely audible in the oppressive space. "We can't be near the house anymore. This cavern's too large." Miller nodded grimly, his own sense of spatial orientation completely disrupted. They descended perhaps 30 feet, but the chamber they'd entered felt deep underground, as if they'd somehow traveled much further than their actual steps could have carried them. "Stay focused on the mission," he instructed, though his own professional calm was beginning to fray. Missing persons, evidence collection, everything else is secondary. Their flashlight beams revealed the chamber's true horror, arranged around the circular space were alcoves carved into the stone walls, each containing what appeared to be human remains. But these weren't the natural decay of burial. These bones showed signs of careful arrangement, as if displayed for some purpose. "Jesus Christ," Rodriguez whispered, her camera automatically documenting the grisly scene. "How many people?" Miller counted silently, his law enforcement training overriding his revulsion. "At least a dozen visible from here, could be more in the shadows." As they moved deeper into the chamber, their lights revealed fresher remains in several alcoves, clothing and equipment that looked modern rather than the decades old. In one niche, Miller spotted a familiar camera bag. "That's Sam Doyle's equipment," he confirmed, carefully photographing the scene without disturbing potential evidence. "He was here, recently." Miller trained his light on the adjacent alcove, his face paling at what he found. "Sir, you need to see this." Ellie Navarro's climbing harness hung from a hook carved into the stone, torn and bloody. Beside it, arranged with ritualistic precision, were personal items belonging to all three missing persons. Joe's watch, Sam's backup camera, Ellie's compass. "They were all here," Miller concluded, his voice tight with controlled emotion. "But where are the bodies?" A sound echoed through the chamber, not quite human, but containing elements of familiar voices. Miller spun towards the source, his light revealing movement in the deeper shadows. "Did you hear that?" he asked, his hand instinctively moving towards his weapon. Miller nodded, his own training putting him on high alert. The sound came again, multiple voices speaking in unison, but the words were wrong somehow, as if human vocal cords were being used by something that didn't understand speech. "We need to investigate that sound," Miller decided, despite every instinct screaming at him to retreat. "But we stay together. No one moves more than an arm's length from the group." As they advanced towards the deeper section of the chamber, their lights revealed more alcoves, more remains. Some were ancient, reduced to bone and tattered fabric. Others appeared more recent, showing varying signs of decay. The pattern was clear. This place had been collecting victims for far longer than the house above had existed. "Sir?" Rodriguez's voice was barely a whisper. "The symbols on the walls, they're moving." Miller followed her gaze, watching in disbelief as the carved ruins seemed to pulse in their own inner light. The movement was subtle but undeniable, lines reshaping themselves, curves flowing into new configurations. "Camera's malfunctioning," Rodriguez reported, tapping the device. "Won't record properly anymore." Miller checked his own equipment, finding similar failures. His radio produced only static, his flashlight dimmed despite fresh batteries, and his service weapon felt unusually heavy in its holster, as if the metal itself had grown denser. The whispered voices grew louder, more distinct. Miller could almost make out individual words, names, perhaps, or incantations in a language he didn't recognize. But underneath the alien syllables, he heard something that made his blood freeze. Fragments of familiar voices. "Help us," came Joe Rain's voice, distorted but recognizable. "Please, help us." "Don't leave us here," added Sam Doyle, his photographer's voice pleading from the darkness. "It hurts." Ellie Navarro's strong voice had become a whimper. "Make it stop hurting." Martinez raised his flashlight towards the sound, but the beam seemed to bend away from its source, as if the darkness itself was reflecting the light. "Those aren't our missing persons," Miller said firmly, though his voice betrayed his uncertainty. It's mimicry, psychological manipulation. But even as he spoke, doubt crept into his mind. What if his friends were still alive down here, trapped and suffering? What if leaving them meant condemning them to whatever horror had claimed the other victims? We investigate the sources of the voices, he decided. Carefully. Any sign of immediate danger, we retreat to regroup. As they moved deeper into the labyrinthine chamber, Miller's years of experience began to fail him. The logical, methodical approach that had served him throughout his career proved inadequate against something that operated outside natural law. The whispered pleas grew more desperate, more personal, calling upon memories and emotions only the real Joe, Sam, and Ellie could have known. Behind them, their entry point had vanished into the shadows and moved independently of their light sources. The chamber seemed to be healing itself, ensuring that whatever had claimed the previous victims would soon have 3 more. Meanwhile, Lieutenant Park's team had broken through the iron-banded door in the servants' quarters, revealing their own passage into the underground complex. But their path led to a different section of the same vast network, a series of ritual chambers where the wars bore more recent carvings. These symbols are fresh, Officer Stevens observed, running his gloved finger along the grooves that showed tool marks. Someone's been working down here recently. Parks nodded, his attention caught by a series of alcoves, similar to those Miller's team had discovered. But these niches contained different arrangements, not remains, but personal belongings arranged in specific patterns around what appeared to be summoning circles. It's like a museum, Officer Kim whispered. Trophies from victims. The chamber they'd entered connected to the other through a narrow passage that seemed to extend in all directions. Their attempted radio contact with the surface had failed completely, leaving them isolated in the underground maze. We need to map our route, Parks decided, pulling out chalk to mark their passage. No point rescuing missing persons if we can't find our way back. The chamber they'd entered connected to others through narrow passages that seemed to extend in all directions. Their attempted radio contact with the surface had failed completely, leaving them isolated in the underground maze. We need to map our route, Parks decided, pulling out chalk to mark their passage. No point rescuing missing persons if we can't find our way back. But as they moved through the passages, Parks noticed that their chalk marks were fading, absorbed into the stone as if the walls themselves were alive and healing. The realization sent a chill through him that had nothing to do with the chamber's temperature. Sir, Stevens called from a connecting passage. You need to see this. Parks joined him at the entrance to another ritual chamber, this one dominated by a raised platform carved from black stone. Arranged on the platform were 3 shapes that might have been human, though their positioning and condition made identification difficult. Could be our missing persons, Park observed, though something about the scene felt wrong. The shapes were too still, too perfectly arranged, as if positioned for a display rather than where they had fallen. As they approached the platform, Kim's flashlight caught movement, not from the shapes themselves, but from the shadows that seemed to flow around them like living things. The darkness had texture here, substance that their lights couldn't fully penetrate. Those aren't bodies, Stevens realized, his voice tight with dawning horror. They're shells, husks. The shapes on the platform were human in outline, but wrong in every detail that mattered. They retained their basic form of people, but their substance had been somehow drained away. That might once have been Joe, Sam, and Ellie. From speakers hidden somewhere in the chamber walls came a voice Parks recognized. Detective Miller, calling for backup. But the voice was wrong somehow. Too eager, too persuasive. Don't trust it, Parks whispered to his team. That's not really Miller. As if responding to his skepticism, the voice changed, cycling through the missing person's voices, then the voices of Parks' own family members, his wife, his children, people who couldn't possibly be in this place. It's learning, Kim observed, professional training warring with primal terror, adapting its approach based on our responses. Parks nodded grimly. Whatever inhabited this place was intelligent, patient, and had been refining its techniques for generations. The missing persons weren't just victims, they were resources, their voices and memories absorbed and repurposed to lure new prey. We document everything we can and get out, he decided. This is beyond our capabilities. But as they turned to leave, The passages they'd entered through had shifted. The chalk marks that should have guided them back to the surface were gone, absorbed into walls that now showed different configurations than before. They were trapped in a maze that rewrote itself, with something ancient and hungry watching their every move. Corporal Davis's basement team had discovered the most disturbing evidence yet, a vast ritual chamber that appeared to be the heart of the underground complex. The space was enormous, its ceiling lost in shadows that their light couldn't reach, its walls covered with carvings that hurt to look at directly. At the chamber's center stood an altar carved from black stone, its surface stained with substances that could only be blood. Arranged around it in precise patterns were symbols that seemed to pulse with their own light, creating a hypnotic display that drew the eye despite the mind's revulsion. This is the source, Davis realized, his voice echoing strangely in the vast space. Whatever's been happening here, this is where it originates. Officer Thompson circled the altar, documenting the scene despite his equipment's increasing malfunctions. The stains are recent. Some might be days old, others look fresh. As they investigated the ritual space, their lights revealed evidence of the missing person's presence. Bloodstains that matched DNA samples they'd been provided, personal items arranged in specific patterns around the altar, and most disturbingly of all, recordings. A small digital recorder, Sam Doyle's backup device, set on a ledge carved into the altar's base. When Thompson activated it, their own voices emerged from the speaker, not from the recordings of their current investigation, but conversations they hadn't had yet, words they hadn't spoken. That's impossible, Martinez whispered, but the evidence was undeniable. The recorder contained hours of audio documenting their entire investigation, including their capture and what appeared to be their eventual fate. It's predicting our actions, Davis realized with growing horror. Or controlling them? The recorded voices became pleas for help, screams of agony, and finally silence. The complete documentation of their destruction. But at the end, new voices emerged. Davis, Thompson, and Martinez, speaking with the same hollow tone they'd heard from the missing persons. We're already caught, Thompson said, his voice flat with despair. This whole investigation was orchestrated. We're not rescuing anyone. We're being collected. Davis fought against this crushing realization, his training demanding action even in the face of impossible circumstances. We fight it. Whatever this thing is, it's not invincible. The witnesses escaped. Miller's still free. But even as he spoke, the chamber's walls began to close, the space contracting around them like a living thing. The altar's symbols flared brighter, casting shadows that moved independently of their light sources. From hidden speakers came the voices of Detective Miller, ordering them to stand down, to accept their fate, to join the collective willingly. But Davis recognized the same hollow quality he'd heard in the recordings. This wasn't the real Miller, but a construct wearing his voice. Stay together, he commanded, though he wasn't sure it mattered anymore. We document what we can, and we fight until we can't. The chamber continued to contract, the walls pressing closer with each passing moment. Their equipment failed completely now, leaving them in darkness broken only by the pulsing symbols on the altar. And in that darkness, something ancient and patient began to feed once again. At the command post, the radio silence had become total. Officer Shen found herself alone with Sarah, Marcus, and Lily as the other supervisors struggled to maintain contact with the search teams. Officer Shen found himself alone with Sarah. 12 minutes since the last communication, Shen reported, professional composure beginning to crack. All teams, all frequencies, complete blackout. Sarah stood, her decision made. We're going in. Ma'am, I can't allow, Shen began, but Sarah cut him off. You can't stop us. We're not under arrest, and your people are trapped in there. She turned to Marcus and Lily, just like our friends were. Marcus nodded grimly. The basement. That's where Miller's team went, and that's where the entity is strongest. Lily wrapped her arms around herself, still hearing Ellie's voice in her mind. We're waiting for you. It wants us to come. This whole investigation was designed to bring us here. Maybe, Sarah acknowledged. But that doesn't change the fact that people are dying in there. Our friends, the The police officers? How many more before we act? Officer Shen reached for his radio, trying once more to raise any of the teams. Only static answered him. In the distance, towards the property's northern boundary, gunshots echoed through the morning air. Rapid fire, desperate, and silence. The isolated gunfire confirmed what they had all knew, but hadn't been willing to admit. The Whittaker house wasn't just claiming individual victims anymore. It was taking entire teams, using them to lure more prey into its web. Sarah picked up her backpack, checking the salt, iron, and protective symbols Lily had researched. We go unprepared, we stick together, and we get our people out. All of them? Lily asked quietly. All of them, Sarah confirmed, though she couldn't quite meet Lily's eyes. They all knew the truth. Whatever was happening in that house, not everyone was coming out alive. The question was how many they could save, and whether they'd become victims themselves in the attempt. As they approached the house, its windows seemed to watch them with patient hunger. After decades of feeding on isolated victims, it was about to receive the feast it had been orchestrating all along.